Protect yourself and your family from unexpected challenges. Consider accident-only income protection. Click the link in the description to find out more.
So the other thing I want to speak to you about, Dom, is I think there's an interview that Eddie Hearn did yesterday, and basically he was quoted as saying, Ben Davison has been a part of Anthony Joshua's training team behind the scenes for his past few fights, and he said his age has been working with Davison tactically when in the UK, though Derek James is the main trainer. But I think that was corrected by Ben Davison. I think Ben retweeted that and said it was a few weeks, not the last few fights, so that might have been a bit of an error. So what do you make of that as a setup, having Ben Davison in his corner?
Well, we had the conversation a few weeks back when it was first known that Anthony Joshua was ticking over in Ben Davison's gym, and I think I said, yeah, you'll probably end up training with him. And then Eddie came out and said, no, there's no ways Anthony Joshua training with Ben Davison. He's still training with over in America. Now Eddie's kind of seems like he's muddying the waters and saying, oh, even before Anthony went to tick over with Ben, there was conversations tactically going off in the background, which kind of smooths his way back into training with Ben. I remember Eddie saying there's no way he's training with Ben Davison. So it's all the, blurring the lines again, isn't it? And I wouldn't be surprised. We've had that bit of a blur. He's just a one-off training session. Now he's a tactician. Well, the guys training with in America, who I once had a running over, Errol Spence and Kell Brook. I wouldn't think he would be the type of trainer to allow Ben Davison to be the tactician behind the scenes, because he's a very credible, high-level trainer anyway, so why would he do that? So don't be surprised, and as my dad used to say, I could be wrong and I have been wrong. Don't be surprised if Anthony Joshua ends up training with Ben Davison.
What do you make of that? I know you kind of touched on it there, the whole angle of having somebody to do your tactics, because people that know how Ben Davison works, he's very high on film footage. He's got Lee Wiley that works with him. They break down footage, and I've seen first-hand evidence of them working towards certain game plans and tactics, and then I've seen it come off in fights, and I've seen that with my own eyes. And obviously I know you're old school, and Derek James, I'm assuming he's old school as well. Do you guys do that as well, or where do you kind of draw the line in the middle?
Well, look, the easiest tactics in the world is, as a boxing trainer, is to make sure the fighter has got an exceptional jab and a good defence and good reflexes. And a typical example of that is, if I said to you, and maybe you're not going to answer this question, who's got the best jab in boxing? The fastest, the most accurate?
I couldn't even say, to be fair.
I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, Floyd Mayweather. And when Floyd Mayweather's in trouble, the jab comes out. The jab sets up everything. So the only tactics you need in a fight is to have a terrific jab. That's the first thing. Yeah, game plans are good, because you can work out what your opponent's set moves are. When we did Kell Brook against Golovkin had really 4 to 6 very good trademark combinations what came off the jab. And we went through it with Kell Brook. Same when Kell Brook boxed Sean Porter. Yeah, there were tactics involved. What Kell had to do to nullify what Sean Porter had got. And that happens at a very high level, because you've got to have the fighter who can actually take on board the tactics, believe it or not. Because there are a lot of fighters who suffer with, who are off the spectrum. They've got ADHD, ADD. They've got lots of things. They can't, when you're telling them stuff or explaining, some can't actually take it into the ring and execute it. Some can. So it's all right having all the tactics, but you've got to be able to execute the tactics. You've got to understand the tactics. And I always refer back to Joe Gallagher with Scott Quigg against Cole Frampton, where people were complaining, saying that, you know, Frampton, he was going back to the, not Frampton, he was going back to the corner and asking, you know, Joe, what next? And I call it fighting by numbers, like painting by numbers. So you can have all the tactics in the world, but the fighter's got to be able to execute what you're telling them, even when they're under pressure, even when they think the tactics aren't working, they still got to stick to the plan. Kell Brook was very good at that, and you tell him how to adjust, and he'd do a move and he'd get clipped doing it, and he wouldn't think, "Phew, that didn't work." He would make the tactic work. So tactics are all right, but it's a blueprint, or it's an outline how to do it. But you've got to have the confidence as a fighter and confidence in your trainer to execute that move when it's all coming on top. And sometimes it might start going a little bit wrong in a fight, and the trainer might say, stick to the tactics. And then after 2 or 3 rounds, the tactics, what you've put in place, start to work because of what the other fighter's not doing, or how the other fighter reacts, or how the other fighter behaves on what you've seen of him in other fights. You know he's going to either fade, or his hands are going to drop, or he's going to start moving the wrong way, or he's going to get drawn into a fight when he should be boxing. There's lots of ways to do it. And you can watch, you can watch lots of videos on that. Yeah, that helps. You can go to live events. You can watch the fighters, the opponent's lifestyle.
Who should be watching, the fighter or the trainer?
No, the trainer. The trainer should be watching. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to watch. You've got to sit down and watch with the fighter. But I always remember Bernard Hopkins interviewing Kell Brook, and saying, "Have you watched much of Golovkin?" He went, "No, I've just seen a few bits of his stuff." "Have you studied him?" "No, I leave that to my trainer." And Bernard Hopkins looked at me. He went, "Him?" I went, "Yeah." He goes, "He watches the fights and tells me what to do." And Bernard Hopkins was in disbelief, as if to say, "I watched everybody I boxed, all my opponents, everything I needed to know." But Bernard came from, I think spent most of his time in the rough gyms in America, Philadelphia, wherever he was. You have to learn the hard way in them places, because you get thrown to the wolves. You have to fight. It's a tough place. But Kell Brook wasn't the type of kid who would sit down and watch videos and kind of learn anything from it. He'd watch the fights and he'd watch certain bits, but that wasn't his forte. He didn't overanalyze stuff. So you work out a plan, you sit down and talk him through it afterwards. He didn't want to sit down there. He'd be saying, "Well, it's like your job to work this one out, Dominic." That's what he'd say. And then we go over the points afterwards. So with the Golovkin, we went through certain stuff. And you look, when he fought Golovkin, there were times when Golovkin was throwing hooks and he was nearly falling over himself. Kell probably outmaneuvered Golovkin more than any other fighter. Yeah, well, he got stopped. People are going to say, yeah, he did get stopped. And it might have been the best 4 or 5 rounds that you'd ever seen with Golovkin. But, we're talking eye fractures. Well, he might have got caught up sooner or later, yeah, but we might not have.
Going back to the Ben Davison being the tactician, like, I know you kind of raised some of the negative points in that, but, on the positives, you've got 2 brains. You've got somebody who's looking at the tactics and maybe somebody doing the training. I think from what I've gathered, looking at Anthony Joshua's socials, he appears he's been at Ben's gym for the good last few months or so, obviously taking over, as he said initially. So are you thinking he's not been there taking over? Do you think he may be looking to switch?
I don't think he's been there taking over, has he? I think he's been there, dipping his toes in the water. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think you can have a trainer, you're training you, and then somebody else coming and doing the tactics. You've got to, realistically, as a trainer, you should know everything. You should, look, I can get in that ring on my own and do the corner. I can rinse the mouth, do the cuts, do the motivation. I can wrap the hands, and I can do everything what a trainer needs to do. I can do what 3 men can do. It's just harder to do it on yourself, and you should be able to know the job inside out. So as a trainer, I would not let anybody be telling me tactics. Yeah, I do have people doing the cuts, only very, very respected people, because if I allow somebody to do the cuts in a fight and they get it wrong, that's my time and the training camp gone down the pan. You look, when Kell Brook's boxed Sean Porter, I did the cuts. So there's a guy in boxing there, Sheldon, who does all the cuts for most people, does hand wrap. Yeah, very, very reliable, very good. I'll have him, but I wouldn't let anybody else do it. So as a trainer, you've got to actually be complete. You should be able to know it all. Yeah, you might have a bit of outside perspective, but you've got to make the ultimate decision.
So, if we assume at some point Anthony Joshua will announce Ben Davison as his next trainer, because obviously, like you said there's a chance that Derek James may not want a second person in the corner. So if it is Ben Davison, what do you think of that as a move for him at this stage?
Well, I suppose, look, Ben's riding out at the minute. He's got Lee Wood doing really well. He's worked with a lot of high-profile fighters, and he's the coach of the moment, so to speak.
I think Billy Joe's there as well.
Yeah, well, Billy Joe's been known Ben, the mates. They've known each other for a long time. So, Derek James is a good trainer. I think egos aside, Derek James is going to think, well, why do I need Ben Davison being involved? There's, who knows? We'll see, won't we? Well, only time will tell. Is it a good move? Well, it might be. He's obviously worked with Tyson Fury, Ben Davison as well. But I think that's going to be as beneficial to Anthony Joshua, having Ben as the inside man, as it was for Amir Khan to have Bomac as the trainer against Kell Brook. I remember Bomac saying, I know Kell Brook inside out and all. Yeah, Ben Davison might know, the tactics to beat Tyson Fury or the little bits of inside information. He might do. But that's, it probably won't be any good to Anthony Joshua, because Tyson's got a far superior boxing brain than Anthony Joshua. He has. It's as simple as that. And that's the only person who's going to beat Tyson Fury is Tyson Fury beating himself, not turning up 100% against Anthony Joshua. The best version of Anthony Joshua never beats the best version of Tyson Fury.
And again, going to this trainer thing, that it's quite obvious to assume that people will give him some hammer over changing trainers again. But obviously, if you go through history, a lot of fighters have had trainers on. I think Tyson's had 4 or 5 potentially as well. Does looking at that as on the outside, having 4 or 5 different trainers, working with so many different mindsets, Tyson and AJ, because I think if I go through some of the names, I think because I wrote them down earlier. So AJ's had McCracken, Rob Garcia, Angel Fernandez, Derek James, and potentially Ben Davison next. And Tyson had his uncle Huey, Peter Fury, Ben Davison, and he's got Sugar Hill now. So that's a lot of boxing brains moulded into one. Surely both fighters are going to benefit of that somehow.
Well, let's look from AJ's side. So every trainer you've named on AJ's side is a respectable trainer who's done really well in boxing. Most people won't have heard of Huey Fury, who trained Tyson at first, his uncle. At the time when Peter trained him, he was relatively unknown anyway. Then, who did he have after that?
Ben Davison.
Ben Davison, and Ben wasn't...
Ben brought him back from, obviously, 27 stone.
Well, actually, maybe he did, but the person who actually brought Tyson back from being 27 stone was Greg Marriott, the nutritionist, because it was all about weight loss. So let's not get that muddled up. Greg Marriott, and Tyson will tell you the same thing. The hardest thing in the world is not for a fighter to get in there and have a fight or hit somebody. The hardest thing is the battle with weight and fitness. So you had Ben Davison, who wasn't, relatively known at the time. The only kind of reputable trainer that Tyson's actually had in his whole career then is Sugar Hill, compared to the 4 or 5 that AJ's had. And then you have to compare who's got the furthest or who's now the heavyweight champion of the world, and it's Tyson Fury. So Tyson Fury's got through with far better four adequate trainers than Joshua has. So that's his ability, what's got him through. Yeah, so he's had trainers who haven't been the top level trainers. He hasn't had top level trainers. That's no disrespect to anybody. That's just on a comparison to the people that AJ's had.
Like levels of experience of working fighters.
Well, yeah, but all right. But if we ask, nobody would probably know who Tyson's first trainer was. Who did Huey train? He will have trained a lot of people behind the scenes, amateurs and everything else. Not taking that away from him, but a lot of people won't know who he is. So, Peter, since Tyson's obviously had other fighters and done really well, his son, Savannah Marshall, Peter's getting a name for himself. But at the time when he was involved with Tyson, he was relatively unknown. That's what I'm saying to you. But all the trainers that Anthony Joshua have had have always been well known. So Tyson's got through his career with lesser experienced trainers than Anthony Joshua has. And he's now the heavyweight champion of the world. So that tells you one thing. That tells you that Tyson Fury's ability has overrode most of what his trainers know. So that's, a plus.
Counter argument to that, because I was like trying to look at the counter arguments. The only mutual opponent they both will have at some point will be Usyk. Obviously, Usyk's got 2 wins over AJ. The second one was a close fight. The other loss AJ had was Ruiz, which he reversed. So based on that and achievements, is it fair to say that they're not that far apart? Because a lot of people talk about AJ's legacy and the fights that he's had. There's a lot of big names on there, and I've seen the guys on TalkSport recently have talked about Tyson's defences. Have said 3 against Wilder, and then obviously they said about the White and Chisora fight, and they're kind of suggesting that AJ's got the better legacy, etc. I think they also said that he's the bigger name as well, bigger pay-per-view name, based on suggestions that the pay-per-view didn't do too well, but obviously we don't know if that's fact or not. So based on all them sort of factors I'm putting into the mix, is it fair to say that they're both, until they fight each other, it'd be unfair to say which one's got the greater legacy? I
don't even think they have to fight each other, do they? I think when Tyson fights Usyk, that'll be an indication of where they all are with each other. And then, obviously, when they fight each other, it'll be an indication. Realistically, in boxing, it's not where you start; it's where you finish. That's what it is. So you look at Roy Jones, fantastic career, boxed everybody, beat everybody. He was untouchable at one point, and everybody thought he was going to beat Joe Calzaghe. Joe Calzaghe beat him, and then kind of finished on a win, and then Roy Jones carried on and ruined his legacy in this, sense of getting banged out and beat by people he should never got beat by. So it's where you finish in boxing. That's where it is. So Tyson's got to finish on top. We'll see from the Usyk fight, we'll get a comparison there. And then that'll make the Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua fight more interesting to see how Usyk does with Tyson Fury. He might beat Tyson Fury, I don't think he will. But the kind of thoughts what crossed my mind is that as Tyson got past the point in boxing where he's particularly bothered or he's got anything to achieve or he can be motivated, because it's all down to being motivated. This is what people don't understand. The amount of money they've got doesn't matter. It's the motivation to beat the man in front of you. And I had a conversation with Kel before he boxed me at Hearn. He goes, "This is my last fight." And it was one of the most, apart from the Sean Porter fight, it was the most motivated I've ever seen Kell Brook. He was the easiest person to train. And he made easy work of that fight. Very, very easy. And I wish he'd have done the exact same for all the fights he had. Because sometimes he's just trained enough to beat the people in front of him. So for Tyson Fury, it's whether he's got the motivation to want to be the baddest man on the planet. And I said to Kell Brook, he said, "When will I know when I pack up?" I says, "When you wake up in the morning and you've no longer got, the urge to beat somebody up in sparring, or when people are shouting your name out, you think, I'm going to fill him in, I want to fight him, I'll show the world." When you no longer have that inclination to do that anymore, that's the time to pack up. And he came in a couple of weeks back and we were laughing and joking, and I think Conor Benn had boxed and he'd been shouting Keller, and I went, "What you reckon?" He went, "I'm not bothered anymore, Dominic." He says, "What you told me about not being bothered, and when people call me out," he goes, "I can laugh and enjoy life because I've done my bit." And that's what it is. And if Tyson's got to that point where he's doing it because he's still the heavyweight champion of the world, but he doesn't really want to do it, then he'll get beat. But if he really wants to tell everybody and show everybody, and he's still got the urge that he wants to be the number one in the world, and he'll beat AJ and he'll flatten Usyk, and he's still got that urgency and urge about him to do it, then he'll do it. That's what's going to get him beat, when he's no longer got that urge to do it.
The last thing I've got to ask you is obviously we've spoken about Tyson and AJ quite a bit. I think a lot of the people assume that maybe you're a fan of Tyson Fury, and then you've always had a negative opinion of AJ. So no matter what he does, you're not really going to praise anything he does. So I just want to get your response to that.
No, look, boxing's boxing. Outside of who I train, My loyalty is always with the fighters I train. But when I'm looking at a perspective of every other fighter, I just try and give it as I see it. You know, because I've had fighters in this gym. You know, I had 2 kids fight Billy Joe Saunders, and then I trained Billy Joe Saunders. You have to give people respect for where it is, and I'm just trying to give the view. I try and give an impartial view. I'm not a Tyson Fury fan, and I'm not an Anthony. People probably won't believe this. I'm not actually a massive fan of boxing. My father loved boxing. He lived, he breathed, he ate boxing, he lived for it. And obviously we were brought up in that environment, but I'm not a massive boxing fan in that sense. I'm a fan of training the people I have to train, the fighters I've got, getting them from A to B, getting from the bottom of the pile to the top of the pile. And I like to see big fights, but I haven't really got any favourites in boxing. I can admire a lot of people and what they've done. And, you know, I can be a bit disillusioned with fighters who should have achieved something they didn't and they've thrown it all away, because you see it so often. What happens in this gym happens on the whole all over the world with fighters. There's kids who should have been world champions who weren't. There's kids who should never have been world champions who were. The kids who underachieved, kids who overachieved. It's a broad range, but the basic characters of fighters is the same. So I'm not, you know, biased towards Tyson Fury and, you know, hating on Anthony Joshua or Usyk or anybody else. I'm just saying as I see it. And if Anthony Joshua beats Tyson Fury or Usyk beats Tyson Fury, I'll be the first one to say, you know, fair play, fantastic. I'm glad they did. Not like, oh, he got beat, you know, he shouldn't have lost that fight, he got robbed, it with this, it without the other. I don't see it like that. If they win, they win. If I had a guy and he got beat fair and square, I'd say, yeah, he got beat fair and square, that's it, that's how it happens. You can give an insight to why they got beat, you know, they weren't training properly or they got an injury or whatever. But, you know, if fighting is the better man wins on the night, that's what boxing's about. And if we were getting fair decisions in fights, boxing would be a much better place.
I appreciate you answering that question, Dom. I will say that I think when I asked you that question, I remember you said a few months ago that I think you credited Anthony Joshua for bringing British boxing back to where it was. So I just thought that in my head just as I was talking there. So yeah, you're not all negative. You have actually credited him for changing the face of British boxing. So on that, it's been an hour, Dom. I hope everyone's enjoyed this interview. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe to Boxing King Media. Thank you for your time, Dom.
No problem.
Have you ever been stranded on the side of a motorway with a broken down car? Like me, is that something that worries you? That's where motor breakdown insurance comes in. If your vehicle breaks down, a trained professional will be sent out to get you back on the road. Or if this is not possible within the specified time frame, to transport you to your home or to the nearest garage.